Spring arrives, and as the days begin to lengthen, with the sunrise and sunset later each day, I reminded of this time during my youth. I lived with my mother and my sister in our little cottage amongst the Cumbrian fells. After a harsh winter, the warming days felt like a reward for surviving the snows and the frosts. The earth revived in bursts of colour. Trees displayed their first blossoms, and the woods filled with daffodils and bluebells. These felt innocent times, carefree, without the stresses of the wider world. My sister and I spent our days playing in the woods and meadows, laughing and feeling the brightness warm our faces. Often we would sit, in silent contemplation, and fished with makeshift rods, catching sticklebacks and throwing them back into the babbling brook. We were children of the earth. Our mother made us woolen clothing and fed produce from our vegetable garden. To have meat on our plate was an occasional luxury, and we felt thankful for all that nature provided. In these modern times, it is easy to forget the thin line that divides humanity from the earth that birthed us, and easy to forget that to abuse nature is to invite its wrath. It is a lesson I learned as a child, and one I will never forget. This world still has those small things forgotten by most that still reside in the diminishing wilds. As we encroach into their realms, these fae fade into memory, but occasionally, often inexplicably, we fall into their traps and their schemes. Far from being the fantastical, beautiful creatures from fiction, the reality is that their bitterness towards the human race often leads to tragic outcomes. I recall the angelic face of Caitlin, my sister, and her joy as she raced through the meadows, swimming through a sea of wildflowers. Her giggling rang around the valley as I pursued her up the slopes. She was easy to catch. My legs were older and stronger, but I knew she enjoyed the thrill of the chase, and we would often collapse on the slopes, out of breath. We watched the little boats on the lake below going about their business as our racing pulses subsided. We would then laze around until the late afternoon, making daisy chains and watching the butterflies flitting around before returning home to find our dinner prepared by Mother. Around the dinner table, our mother would tell us the myths around the Fae folk said to inhabit these wild regions. She told us they were once common and living in harmony with people before the arrival of towns and cities forced them to retreat into hidden groves. The chimney stacks bellowing smoke and the loud machines made by humans frightened them, and they became resentful and suspicious. She told us to steer clear of the wild hollows in the woods, where the bluebells flowered at this time of year, lest we hear one of the bells ring. "If you hear a bluebell ring, bad times the Fae will bring," she warned. I never gave it much credence, having reached the age where such stories held little sway, but Caitlin sat enraptured by them. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Caitlin was already up, her breakfast half-eaten, bouncing on her chair with excitement. "Can we explore today, please?" Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "I want to go further than before." I glanced at Mother, who was kneading dough for the day's bread. She nodded slightly, though her brow furrowed. "Mind your back before dusk," she cautioned. Caitlin nodded solemnly, though I caught the gleam in her eye. That look always meant trouble. We set off with a small satchel of bread and cheese, following the familiar path through the meadow before veering eastward, where the trees grew denser and the undergrowth thicker. The forest floor was alive with spring ferns, unfurling like tiny green fists opening to the world, mushrooms sprouting in damp corners, and wildflowers dotting the moss like scattered jewels. "Let's go this way." Caitlin pointed to a barely visible deer trail winding between two ancient oaks. Their gnarled branches reached across the path, creating a natural archway. "We've never been down there before," I hesitated. "Exactly." She darted ahead, her laughter trailing behind her like ribbon. The path narrowed as we ventured deeper. The forest grew quieter. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just our footfalls on soft earth. Something about the stillness made the hair on my neck rise. "Caitlin, perhaps we should turn back." She paused, head tilted as if listening. "Do you hear that?" I heard nothing but the thudding of my heart. "It's like music." She moved forward with purpose now, pushing aside a curtain of hanging ivy. Behind it lay a narrow passage between two boulders, concealed by years of vegetation. Without hesitation, Caitlin squeezed through. "Wait," I called, but she was already gone. I followed, scraping my shoulders against the rough stone. The passage opened suddenly into a hollow, a perfect circle of land surrounded by ancient trees. And covering every inch of ground was a carpet of bluebells, their violet-blue heads nodding gently though there was no breeze. The hollow seemed to exist in its own world. The light was different here, softer, dreamlike. The air hung heavy with the scent of the flowers, almost too sweet to bear. "It's beautiful," Caitlin whispered, stepping carefully among the blooms. I stood frozen at the edge, unable to shake the feeling we'd stumbled somewhere we shouldn't be. "Look how they shimmer!" Caitlin danced between the flowers, her fingers brushing their delicate heads. Each step carried her deeper into the hollow, her footfalls impossibly light, as if the bluebells were guiding her inward. "Don't go too far," I called, but my voice sounded muffled in the thick air, as though the hollow swallowed my words before they could reach her. The bluebells swayed in her wake, though the air remained still around me, unnaturally so, like the breath held before a storm breaks. A flash of movement caught my eye, a streak of silver between the trees, quick as moonlight on water. I blinked, and it vanished, leaving me wondering if my eyes had played tricks. "Did you see that?" But when I turned back, Caitlin was gone. The sea of flowers stretched unbroken in every direction, no sign of her footprints or disturbed stems. It was as if she'd simply dissolved into the violet haze. "Caitlin?" My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a thunderous warning. "This isn't funny. Come out now." I plunged into the hollow, pushing through the bluebells. Their cool petals brushed against my hands like tiny fingers, almost sentient in their touch. Something darted past, a glimpse of gossamer and starlight that disappeared when I spun toward it, leaving nothing but a fading shimmer in the air. "Show yourself." The words died in the heavy silence, absorbed by the carpet of flowers beneath my feet. Another flicker of movement. This time I caught a suggestion of eyes, ancient and cold as midwinter frost, watching from between the trees. When I looked directly at them, there was nothing but shadow, yet I felt their gaze lingering on my skin like ice. "Caitlin, please!" My voice cracked, desperation seeping through. The hollow seemed larger now, stretching impossibly far in all directions, defying the laws of space. The trees at its edge blurred like a painting left in rain, reality itself seeming to warp and bend. More movement. Shapes that weren't quite human slipped between the trees, always just out of sight. Their laughter, or was it the wind, whispered through the bluebells, mocking my growing panic. I caught glimpses of limbs too long, faces too sharp, movements too fluid to belong to anything I'd ever known. Then I heard it, a single, clear note, like crystal breaking in the stillness. Another joined it, then another, until the air thrummed with the sound of bells, a music both beautiful and terrible, marking the moment when everything changed. I stumbled blindly through the thickening sea of bluebells, their chimes swelling into a deafening chorus. My heart raced as I scanned the hollow desperately for any sign of Caitlin. Panic clawed at my throat when I couldn't find her familiar shape amongst the violet waves. Something brushed against my leg, a tendril of mist that solidified for the briefest moment into a slender, inhuman hand before dissipating. I whirled, gasping, but the hollow remained empty save for the gently swaying flowers. A piercing trill cut through the cacophony of bells like shattering glass. I clutched my ears against the shrill sound as it reverberated in my bones. When it faded, the air stilled, the bluebells falling silent and unnaturally motionless. There, in the dead calm, I caught the faintest gurgle of running water. Following the sound, I pushed through the dense blooms until I reached a narrow stream winding through the hollow's center, and there, cradled in its gentle current atop a bed of wildflowers, lay Caitlin. The word caught in my throat as I splashed into the icy shallows. Her eyes were closed, dark lashes fanning across pale cheeks. A daisy chain rested atop her brow, petals floating loose around her face. She looked utterly at peace, like a woodland nymph taking repose in the embrace of the stream. But her stillness was too profound, her skin too pallid beneath the violet-tinged light. I gathered her limp form into my arms, choking back a sob at how light, how delicate she felt. "Caitlin?" I stroked her cheek, but it was as cold as the water lapping at my knees. "Please, wake up." Her eyelids didn't even flutter. No breath stirred her parted lips. A sharp trill cut the silence, the bluebells ringing out in unison, a chorus of mournful chimes echoing through the hollow. I clutched Caitlin tighter as shadows flickered at the tree line, elongated shapes slipping between the trunks. The bells tolled louder, surrounding us in a discordant peal that reverberated in my skull. I stumbled backwards, holding Caitlin's body close, desperate to escape whatever horrors lurked at the forest's edge. Laughter drifted through the clamor, not joyous but cruel, mocking my anguish. Shapes coalesced in my periphery, limbs too spindly, faces too sharp, eyes glittering with ancient malice. With a final deafening toll, the bluebells fell silent. In the stillness that followed, Caitlin's body seemed to grow lighter, her form unraveling like mist between my arms. I clutched at her, but she slipped through my fingers, dissolving into a cloud of delicate petals that scattered on the breeze. The last I saw was her face, serene as if merely sleeping, drifting as a mist downstream atop the gentle current, her daisy crown still woven through those auburn curls. Then the shadows closed in, and I ran, following the path back through the hollow as the trees bent inward, their gnarled branches grasping, ensnaring me in a maze of thorns and briars that tore at my flesh. Behind me, the bluebells tolled their solemn farewell. I trudged home in a daze, my clothes torn and stained with blood from the brambles. Mother rushed out, her face pale as she took in my haggard appearance. "Where's Caitlin?" she asked, dreading the answer. I could only shake my head, words failing me. Mother's hand flew to her mouth as she crumpled to the ground, a guttural sob tearing from her throat. The search began. Mother and I retraced our steps through the woods, scouring every hollow and glade, but the bluebells were nowhere to be found, as if the earth itself had swallowed that ethereal glade whole. More searchers joined, neighbors and constables beating through the underbrush, calling Caitlin's name until their voices grew hoarse, but the forest remained stubbornly silent, holding its secrets. Days turned to weeks with no sign of her. The authorities declared her missing, presumed dead, but I knew the truth, that she'd been taken, spirited away to some other realm cloaked in myth and folklore. At night, I'd wander back to where the Bluebell Hollow should have been, scouring the trees for any hint of that otherworldly place. Sometimes I'd hear the faintest chime on the breeze and give chase, convinced it was her laughter guiding me home. But the sound always faded, leaving me more lost than before amidst the cruelty of the impassive forest. 1 year to the day after she vanished, on the doorstep of the cottage, sat Caitlin's daisy crown, the brittle blooms still woven together, as delicate as the day she wore them. A little gift, perhaps, from those that had taken her. I clutched the fragile circlet to my chest, breathing in the faintest whisper of her memory. In that moment, I knew she was truly gone, lost forever to the Fae's cruel whims. In the years since, I've sought answers, poring over ancient texts detailing the rituals of the fair folk. I've learned much about their customs, their reverence for nature's boundaries that we mortals have so callously disregarded. Perhaps that was Caitlin's crime in their eyes, her childlike trespass into their domain, a perceived insult to the sanctity of the wild places. Or perhaps she merely caught their fancy, an innocent soul plucked like a wildflower to adorn their timeless realm. I'll never know for certain, but I hope wherever her spirit now resides that she's finally found the magic she always craved. All I have left are the stories Mother wove and the fragile memory of my sister's smile amidst the bluebells. A reminder that, for all their beauty, we must treat the wild places with reverence, lest we tempt forces beyond our understanding.